Hey guys, Andy and Spoken Label back in the house. Easter Saturday. Yes, if you followed the previous episode, we had a couple of students on from the fantastic ML Libra. Yes, now you did a fantastic job introducing me to three of his students. Go and check that podcast out because they were brilliant, all three of them. And if people on the video, they see two blank screens at the bottom of here because Alexis and Nick are still here. They're getting the live experience here. So, but so we're over to their master now. They said master then, but not as a teacher. Sorry, over to Detroit, and we've got the fantastic ML Libra with her. Now, ML, obviously, there's a lot I could ask you here today, mate. Because if people research you, they can see you've been active, certainly bringing collections out since 1980. So there's a lot. I've got a lot I want to ask you. So, but before we start, mate, and this is gonna be hard. Like this could be a long question itself. Where
Okay.
did your background as a creative person come from?
Well, I kind of related to what Alexis Ball was saying. I started scribbling things in my textbooks when I was in the second grade, so I was 7. And look, I come from a working class family. I do not come from intellectuals or academics or my grandparents didn't read poems to me or anything like that. In fact, I didn't even see Disney movies until I had my own kids. Before I saw Bambi and Sleeping Beauty and all that. So I just had this kind of working class background, and I was scribbling these feelings, I guess, in hindsight. When I got into fifth grade, the teacher who I credit with, obviously saving and changing my life in hindsight, because he was a very creative fifth grade teacher. He always had us doing creativity and different kinds of things like that. And looking back, it meant a lot to me. But it was in his class, we looked at a poem, what was called a poem, uh, by Edgar Allan Poe called The Raven. And when I saw that in that textbook, I noticed what I had been scribbling had a lot of white space around it. And he was calling this a poem. So I thought, oh, maybe I'm doing a poem. And I never really told anybody about it. Um, and I just kept writing stuff, saving everything, but never looking back at it. I'd be embarrassed to look at that now. So after that, I knew I was doing poetry. By the time I got to high school, I knew that I was a poet. And I just kept pursuing that. And then when I got into college, I met like-minded people. And 50 years ago, we formed a collective of artists that still exists today. We have a web presence and a newsletter and things that we do called the Ridgeway Artists Collective. And I started along with one of the original guys, the Ridgeway Press, and we started publishing poetry by a lot of different people, little anthologies we would do subversively, meaning using the school's printing capabilities, but telling them it was for another teacher. And then we'd go back and pick it up for said teacher, and we'd have our little booklets, and then we'd put them together and all that stuff. And then I was telling the students, would go take them into stores, we'd price them. Of course, there wasn't the codes and all that stuff back then. And we'd slip them, we'd be stealing in reverse. We'd be putting stuff on their shelves. And we'd go back and people were buying, copies of it. We'd put more copies up. And it was before computers and everything. So they were just ringing
Wow.
stuff up. So that goes back to 1974 when we started that, and we're all still alive, which is amazing, and we're all still friends. In fact, we meet on Zoom uh, every every other week on a Tuesday. We meet on Zoom, and we're mostly based in surrealism and Dada art. In fact, there's a group, I don't know if you know them or not, but they're up in Leeds. They're a group of Dada surrealists up there. and
Mm.
they're hooked in with us.
Ooh.
Um, I mean,
Ooh.
we sought each other or found each other online, but they've become, aware of what we're doing here in Detroit, and we support them, and I guess they support us with their, they have readings and different things like that. So that's how I started with it, and I just continued. And as I got older and knew more about real books and publishing, I published poems, and we started doing chapbooks, and that turned into a real book for me anyway. In I think 1990 was my first perfect bound collection that a group did here in Detroit. We didn't, but this guy did it. He had a really great magazine called Howling Dog magazine that was
Great
pretty
name.
popular.
Great
Yeah, I
name.
know
Yeah.
it was. It was popular around Wayne State back at the time. And then he wanted to branch out to publishing poets, and he selected me as his first one, and we did that. But anyway, so I just got involved with it and continued along pursuing it, but also coming from a working class background. And I'm assuming, maybe I'm assuming too much, but you're from Manchester, which is really kind of the Detroit, if you will, of I mean, Liverpool is too somewhat, but Manchester with the post-industrialism,
Yeah.
that's what we're familiar with in Detroit when
Yeah.
all the companies left and all that stuff.
Yeah.
So coming from that kind of background, one of my main goals was to promote other writers by publishing them, by putting on readings. We started doing readings way back in college before, well, after 1974, but, and nobody would come to readings. Poetry was not popular at all back then. So that, we were doing, and I was just talking to Alexis class Thursday about this. So, eventually I had an idea to do this program to feature a bunch of poets and then musicians. And I booked some of the cooler punk and new wave groups that were around Wayne State at that time. And I booked 40 poets, and we did like a marathon to raise money for a literary organization.
Wow.
And there was a place on campus. It's still there, but it's owned by someone else now. But it was a great kind of nightclub, and a place where we did events. And so we did this in I remember distinctly. It was May of '87. I did my first thing. I called it Rock and Read. And so the idea was we'll sucker the people in for the bands, and then we'll stick a bunch of poets before them. And as it turned out, when the poets ended about 11, we raised a fair amount of money too. But when the poets ended at 11 and the bands came on, people started yelling for more poetry.
Oh, brilliant.
Yeah, it was weird.
Wow.
Like,
Fantastic.
because I come from a time when nobody would go to a poet. I mean, you had to pay people to go to a poetry reading almost. And so that happened. And eventually, as I told the students on Thursday, bands started refusing to play rock and reads because they were like, hey, your people all leave when we come out. They empty the joint. You don't want to play there.
Oh,
It was all a
fantastic.
benefit.
Brilliant.
I moved it to a thing called Read and Feed, where there's a lot of homeless around Wayne State. There always has been. Wayne is set in the middle of the inner city. I mean, it's all changed now. There's stores and bars and things like that there now, but there wasn't back then. And in fact, it was quite dangerous back then. But there was a homeless group that's still there at a church, the Methodist Church, United Methodist, I think it is. And we raised money and food for them all the time with these read and feeds. We didn't, needless to say, have any musicians anymore because they didn't want to do it. But I
Of
started
course.
doing stuff with musicians long ago. And on the reading feeds and the rock and reads, I would do some with some of the area musicians, and I would do some poetry with them. And so I started dabbling in that. And this would have been, the late 80s and so forth. And then I started to record, and a friend had a studio and made a suggestion of, how people sell books, ML, at their readings. Why don't you sell albums and cassettes were big back then. And I thought, oh, that's an interesting idea. And he had a studio, still has a studio down in Wyandotte. So we went down with his musicians and myself, and we recorded the first cassette. That would have probably been really before 87. That would have been like 85 or 84, 85. And it turned into a bigger thing than I thought, as I was mentioning to the folks on Thursday, because we took it on the public radio station here, popular program at the time on a Sunday night, and we played the reel to reel that we had been recording, and people started calling the station, going, "Who is that? Where are they playing?" Well, we weren't anything, but the musicians, some of them who were on the record, were there, and I said, in between while they were playing the cuts from it, "Do you guys want to be a band?" And they said, "Yeah." "Do you want to do shows?" "Yeah." Because you know how musicians are.
Yeah.
So yeah. So I said, okay, everyone's asking us for where we're playing and stuff. And then so then the person broadcasting said, "Well, what's the name of it?" And I had seen Captain Beefheart as a young teen at a ballroom here in Detroit, and I was impressed with his performance because he was like reading poetry and throwing it all around the stage. His set was about 15 minutes, and then they all walked off, and it was Captain Beefheart and his magic band. So when they said, "Well, what do you guys call yourself?" I said, "We're the Magic Poetry Band." And so that began that part of my career for quite a while. And actually the Magic Poetry Band that was together 20 some years ago has just reunited. And surprisingly, they're not all in wheelchairs or anything. They actually can stand up and play. And but we hadn't been together in all those years, and just picked right up. We did an album called Paper Ghost Rain Dance, which has, in the last year or so, has been uploaded on all the streaming services. And the people in that band they said, "Let's do this album live again." Or, as we used to. And I thought, "Okay, we'll try it." So we've been sort of doing shows again with that particular group.
Brilliant. No,
Yeah.
great stuff.
Yep.
I want to ask you next, Tim. I've got a
Yeah.
lot I can ask you, but
Yeah.
this one's a good actually to follow on from music there. When I was researching you, so I always trying to spend a day or two researching all my guests for a chat to them.
Yeah.
And I came across you did a TED talk, didn't you? Which features a brilliant use of music, which I think follows on nicely from that. So tell us about your TED talk then, because that was people are wondering. I think it was a few years ago. It was
Yeah. No,
fascinating.
it was at Wayne State. Wayne State started a TEDx program, and they asked me to be part of it to do something. And as I thought about it, I thought, well, I might as well sort of tell. This is before my memoir was being written and all that stuff, but I thought I might as well tell my story. So I told my story through the music and poetry, with musicians live on stage. And that's basically what it is. I can't remember all the things I said, but I talked about, some of the stuff I've told you already, about my upbringing and so forth. And then we'd segue into, various songs that were either originals or ones that were of influence. I think we started with Hound Dog because Elvis was my first inspiration. As John Lennon said, "Before Elvis, there was nothing." So, which isn't true, but it was for me because I was only 4. So Elvis became quite the thing. Didn't see the Disney movies, as I said, but I have seen all the Elvis movies at the theater when they came out. My grandparents would take me to the theater or drive-ins, which there aren't any. Did you guys have drive-ins in England? I don't know.
No, but we have had them in more recent years. That makes sense. They do tend to
Oh,
hear about a couple, but they're not regular.
okay. Well, we don't have them anymore. There's one left in the Detroit area, but there used to be a lot of them. And that's where we'd go see a lot of with my grandparents, see the Elvis movies. So anyway, what else? What else you
Oh,
want to
right.
know?
Okay.
Andy
Let's move it
N?
on. Let's move on then, Mr. ML Liebler. Okay. Yes. Okay. Now, yeah. Okay. Yes. Next, let's talk about your traveling then, because if people research you, they will notice you've traveled a lot during your creative career, haven't you, as well? An awful amount of countries. And I know for a fact you've done readings in lots of different countries as well. So tell us a little bit about your traveling then.
Well, the thing is again, coming from a working class family, I mean, I never even thought I would ever see Disneyland, because we didn't do that kind of traveling. People didn't fly or anything like that. And we never, a vacation was like maybe 45 minutes from our house or something like that. So I started to do a lot of stuff in the States. And I early on, shortly after the Poetry Resource Center, a newer program came to Detroit called the National Writers Voice at the YMCA. And they wanted to have one in Detroit. They selected different cities they wanted. I had been doing a lot of stuff in New York City at the time, which is where this program comes out of, the 63rd Street Y. And the guy who was running it knew about me because I was, reading a lot in New York. And he called me up in my office at Wayne one day, and I knew who he was, but we weren't friends. And he said, "I want to start a writer's voice in Detroit, and I want you to help me do that." Well, once I started doing that, that was 94. um, my life from a traveling point of view changed radically because for a guy that never really traveled much, I was traveling all around the United States, not only reading and stuff, but helping YMCA start writers' voices. And I've been to some big cities, and I helped them start one in Cheyenne, Wyoming, in Redwoods, not Redwood, but up in Redding, California, which is way up north in California. And then, places like Columbus, Ohio, and Cleveland and places like that too. But I ended up traveling all around in a really interestingly weird way. And then in 2000, I always wanted the Vietnam War plays a major role in my story. I was young, but a young a young neighbor boy right after graduation in 65 was killed in Vietnam, and I didn't know what that was. But I ended up becoming quite active in the anti-war movement, essentially, even as a young kid. And I'm trying to think of why I'm telling you this story.
Story of my life, that. I start a story off and I will forget it halfway through.
I know, I know. But so at any rate, so Vietnam plays a major role, and some of my writing starts to involve that. And while I was traveling around all these YMCA's, I ended up hooking up with early on Country Joe McDonald, who you probably maybe you
I've heard,
don't know.
I've heard of actually. I have heard of.
Country Joe and the
Yeah,
Fish.
yeah, I
Well,
have heard of
Country
him.
Joe, we did an album together and that's what I call my acoustic because I think I have ADD and I get bored with albums or making albums where everything is the same. So the Country Joe album is sort of the ML acoustic album because we did it all acoustically with harmonica and all that stuff. And then I did one with a sort of a jazz group. I'm not really a jazz guy, but I had these well-known jazz musicians, so it turned out to be a bit more funky jazz. And so that is another album that I did, and so on. And then the Magic Poetry Band, I did one with Peter Lewis of Moby Grape, which I really like. That's called The Coyote and the Monk. And then from that, after that, I formed another magic poetry type of band called the Coyote Monk Poetry Band, which nobody could understand the title of that, which comes from that album with Peter. And then I've done an album with Al Cooper, of Al like scored a lot of my poetry, which was called Poetry Score, he called it. And that was just him playing, like on synthesizers and stuff.
Brilliant.
So that was that kind of album. And then I did one with a like a kind of a new wave progressive band here called the High Strung. We started doing some shows in between other shows. But anyway, that got me traveling all around. So in 2000, this is where I was going with it, with Vietnam. One of my friends, a poet from California, she became the chair at the University of Hong Kong. And I always wanted to go to Vietnam. And she said, well, I'm going to be a chair for 3 years. And you want to come to this part of the world. You should come now. So that was 2000. And I went to Hong Kong. And then I got connected with all of the Hong Kong and Chinese poets. So I ended up going back there 3 times or so and
wow.
doing readings all around. And then I became well known in Macao, if you know where Macao is, which was a Portugal colony. I always tell people, because they bought my books and everything. I didn't understand that, but you have to take a hydro boat from Hong Kong to Macau across the South China Sea. And yeah, I would tell people when I got off, I was like Jerry Lewis in France. All these people came running to the dock. And I'm like, what the hell's going on here? So I did a lot of gigs in Macau for a while and taught at their university a bit as well. And that was the launching of my international career. From there, it goes to, I've done a lot of stuff in England, but and Germany, did a lot of stuff in Germany for this. I ended up working with the State Department doing cultural work. So in Germany, they put me on a cultural tour, poetry tour of all the major cities and stuff, and brought me over to do that early on. And then, I always wanted to go to Russia. I don't anymore. I hope Putin isn't watching this, but
I'm just gonna say no comment per se about Putin. I'm not the same reason.
You're too close. But at any rate, I ended
Exactly.
up going to Russia and doing stuff about 4 times in Moscow and St. Petersburg, and a lot of stuff in Novosibirsk, which is in the middle of Siberia. It's a 48-hour train ride from Moscow there. So I did a lot of stuff there. And then I started doing a lot of stuff in Israel and the West Bank. And, I went to the West Bank quite a bit, and I really liked working there, doing poetry and stuff. And then the State Department asked me to go to Afghanistan. And I thought, well, how much more dangerous could it be than the West Bank? Well, it's a lot more dangerous.
I can believe you there.
Yeah, and when I got
Phenomenal.
off the airplane and they were driving me to the embassy compound, there were like everybody on the streets everywhere had machine guns.
Whoa.
And then
Whoa.
alongside the van, a horse-drawn wagon with guys with machine guns rolled up next to our car. And I thought, wow, man, I'm not in Kansas anymore. This is not even the West Bank. This is crazy. It was so crazy. I didn't even tell my wife she knew where I was, but I never told, I had to watch everything I said when I was in country there, because the enemy was always trying to listen in. And several times we had gigs at a place and we had to switch because they got word that there were IEDs and stuff like that in the road. And so we'd have to go to a different place to do a program, and a lot of that. Now, needless to say, I was stupid enough to want to go back after the first time, but then after I left, the Taliban took over everything. So it was pretty bad.
Yeah, completely. It's terrifying.
So I didn't go back there.
Terrifying. I've done a long time ago. I was up in Northern Ireland certainly before
Ooh.
we had the massive ceasefire back in the early 90s. And you walked around there. I was getting shocked seeing soldiers walking around machine guns all the time, and it's
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
not easy. It's not easy.
And that's another place I wanted to see was we did a whole Irish tour of both Ireland and Northern Ireland. I went to Belfast I've been bringing my students over to London and Liverpool
Yes. Do you want to tell
for
us about?
years.
Do you want to tell us about that next? Because what if
Yeah.
people are wondering, we first got talking over your recent tour, and we couldn't connect in person. Henceforth, why this is today.
Right.
But
Right.
tell us about your English tours and where they came from.
Well, here's how that happened. This was something unique too. A person who did scheduling in the English department at Wayne State many years ago, well, early 2000, maybe it was 99 or so, but she said, we want you to teach a Beatles class because I know a lot about the
Next
Beatles.
question. Next question, actually.
They're very important, very big part of my life. And there's a whole chapter in the memoir about that.
Question after that.
Yeah, another one. So when I was teaching the Beatles class, I got the idea. I was also doing a lot of international stuff. So I got the idea of creating a study abroad experience for Wayne students based around that Beatles class. So we did a Beatles class, and then spring break every year. This goes back to about 2006 or something. We would, I'd been to England a number of times. And so I designed a tour, and Liverpool to me is very holy ground. Now, Manchester to younger people is very holy ground, which I know about too. But I started, we went to London, and I created a program that started in London. We went up to Liverpool for 3 or 4 days, like we did with Manchester this year. And then we'd come back to London, and then students could do other stuff. Some would go to Paris, on that quick train, or they would go to other parts of England. Some went to Dublin, things of that nature on sort of our days off. And that's how that started. Now, the Beatle class eventually fell away as time went on because I was teaching other stuff as well. But we kept the study abroad component. And that's how we ended up again recently in Manchester. We hooked up with a business professor who's very cool at Wayne, and he was bringing students mostly to London and Manchester, but he hadn't done it before. So we combined efforts, and I went to Manchester with him, which worked out really, really nice because he had a connection at Salford. Now we know a guy in Manchester pretty well that you may know of. His name is John, and he does the tours, taxi
Yeah,
tours.
John G. Hall. Yes, is that? I presume that's John, right? Yeah, I
Well,
know.
he's a good friend of ours
Oh, great
now.
bloke. Great,
Oh
great,
God.
great
And,
bloke.
and he took my students all around Manchester, and then he took us on a private little tour because the people that go with me on that are real man. What do you guys call yourself? Manchurians?
Mancunians, we call ourselves.
Mancunians. Mancunians. They're really into the music from there. And as am I. I mean, I love Joy Division. In fact, when Joy Division was going to come to America for the first time, we were excited. It was almost not quite like the Beatles, but it was like we really liked them, and they're coming to America, and it was like wow. And then the lead guy Curtis hangs himself
Yeah, terrible story.
before that
Terrible,
tour, and
terrible
we were like,
story.
oh shit. Now what's going to happen to Joy? Well, they became New Order, but they weren't really quite Joy Division. Although
No.
I like that guy Hook. Is his name Peter Hook?
Peter Hook, yes. Oh, I've got a story about Mr. Hook. I'll tell you
Yeah.
off mic. I'm not repeating
Oh,
this one on camera.
all right,
On
all right.
That's why. Yeah,
But I like
he's a
his stuff.
character. He's a character.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I like what he does live. I think he does a cool show, and I like his music and all that. But anyway, so that's what we've been doing since 2006. Every spring break, which ours is in March, we do this trip and students sign up for it. But now the business guy is hooked up in Salford with Salford, and our university has another program that's combined with Salford, where students can come for a whole semester from Wayne State in Detroit and be a student there. So that seems like a natural, and so we kind of, in between doing our stuff over there, came up with the idea of doing the business of rock, like starting with the Beatles and all that, and then moving through the other music in England in particular. And then ending with techno, which started here, but it's really popular over there.
Great stuff. Now, okay. Now, we've hinted already on this. This is very clever linking, because this actually was my next question, actually,
Okay.
about the Beatles. And now, obviously, I know you've got, I'm trying to find, go for my notes now. That was it. I know I was really interested in reading about Beatles Forever. Just tell us a bit about Beatles Forever next time, because this is clearly somewhat major, your projects.
Well, it's the second chapter in the memoir. It's not called Beatles, it's just called Beatles. What I did in my memoir is I took musicians and groups that either I worked with or knew, or they had a major influence on me. So the first chapter is Elvis, obviously, and then Beatles, and then Dylan, and then there's some musicians and stuff that may not be anywhere near as popular. There's a Country Joe chapter, there's an Al Cooper chapter, and things like that. Paul McCartney. I didn't meet Paul McCartney, but I do know the journalist who's from Liverpool. You know him too. I'll say his name and you'll say it correctly, but Paul Dunoir.
Oh,
D-U-N.
good grief! I've met him as well. Yeah, I think my pronunciation. I'm dyspraxic, so I'm going to pass and move on. I've stumbled on that name before, so
no, I know, but
sorry,
the people when I mention it, then they tell me the right way to say it. But anyway, he met with my classes a couple of times up in Liverpool because he moved back up there. He's from there and he moved there, but he's friends with Paul McCartney. So, and he's done projects with Paul McCartney. And I just remember meeting him the first time, and he told me that if Paul McCartney meets you and he doesn't see you for 10 years, he'll always remember your name.
Wow.
He said he has this incredible ability to, hey, ML. And then if I see him in Detroit in 10 years, hey, ML, how you doing? Which is like nutty, I can't remember my students' names, but
that's phenomenal.
And then something, but anyway, so Beatles Forever is a story I wrote many years ago after Lennon was killed, which was a major shock to me and a big issue. Because when I first saw the Beatles on television here, we didn't know who was who the first night. They had to put their names under them. And of course, the most popular then was Ringo because he had a weird name. But as they scanned Paul, George, Ringo, John, I didn't know anything about him, but I just said, man, I don't know what that guy's got going on, but I dig it. Whatever that guy's doing. And then, of course, as time went on, I learned a lot about it. And actually didn't meet him, but got to see him at a thing here in Detroit, political rally that we had many years ago in 71. But so Beatles Forever, I was going to write a poem. I'm a poet, so I'm going to write a poem about John Lennon. And it just wouldn't come. I tried everything. And then I just moved on. Well, I ended up writing sort of this essay, and I titled it Beatles Forever. And it's my story, but combined with the Beatles story. So what I did in 2014, which was the 50th anniversary, I got some really good musicians here in Detroit, and we put what I'll call a library show because we toured libraries mostly. We didn't do bars and all that stuff. And it really caught on. So I plugged in 28 Beatles songs into the story, or parts of Beatles songs in appropriate parts. And that was our show. It ran about 70 minutes, and we've been doing it ever since. And I only created it to do it for the 50th anniversary. Now we're in the 60th anniversary, but libraries heard about it all around the state and elsewhere and called us, and we went in I have to say, it's a really interesting show, and it's pretty funny. It's sad, of course, at the end, but it's pretty funny. And I usually vamp on whatever the audience is. I bring them into the story. So I'm kind of telling the story, but I'm also bringing it up to date. If there's kids in the audience, there's a few bad words in it. And I always point out to the kids that, like close your ears or something. And then I'll use the kids as a vehicle for a few jokes in the play. So it's kind of like a performance piece that we do, and we've been doing it ever since.
Tremendous.
It's crazy.
Just shows you sometimes some things. I've had this before now, and things can keep rolling on and on and on. You might think it's a one-off, and you can carry on and on. I agree with you completely. Excellent stuff. Now, I'm conscious of the time for this part, so
Okay.
what we'll do is we'll wrap up with a couple of quick questions. I want to give you plenty of time to do some poems for us. Now, you've already been talking about us all your memoir. So this is obviously, I think it's going to be, people wonder, you've got tremendous stories to tell. So where are you up to with your memoir at the moment?
Well, I sent it to, I've been working on this for years, and improving it and having some editors help, smooth things out and stuff. So it finally got to the point in August. I sent it to, most of my books come from the Wayne State University Press. I sent it to them in August. I never really heard anything from them. And then I met this person in Wisconsin at the University of Wisconsin who does a teaching press, which I want to start at Wayne. And I sent it to him. And what do you think? Well, he loved it. He said, absolutely, I want to publish. Well, about a week after that, Wayne wrote me and said, absolutely, we want to publish this. And I thought, well, I like this other idea better. The contracts are the same. They're university book contracts. So nobody's getting rich anyway, per se. But they were almost identical. Maybe they use the same form everywhere. So I just signed the contract yesterday for the University of Wisconsin, and I'm going there next Friday. They're celebrating their 40th anniversary of the press, and I'm going to go up there and just to meet the main guy and the students that work on it, and also try to glean some information. So it's finally going to come out like maybe late next year, and people have been asking me about it. I've read, certain chapters from it over this period, some of them on Zoom, and people like it. And everybody knows the Beatles story around here. They've either heard of it or seen it. So that's, obviously a centerpiece for the book in a way. So that's where it's at. It's coming. It will be out next year, and we'll see what happens with it.
Keep us informed, okay? Love to have you on again. I definitely want to read that manuscript. You've sold it to me straight away.
Yeah.
So.
Oh, thanks. I'll send you a copy.
Please
in
do.
the near
Please
future.
do.
Yeah.
Love to read it, definitely. Now, a couple of quick questions to wrap up with, and I want to give you plenty of time for your poetry in the second half. You've already told us one project that's forthcoming. Is there anything else you could reveal or would want to reveal what's coming up?
Well, there's that project. I did do a kind of a new and selected collection. I don't know how much I can hold up, and it's visible with our backgrounds, but there it is.
Yeah, I can see it. Yeah, brilliant.
I did that. Now that was published at a publisher in India, of all weird places, but
wow,
it's kind of a new and selected collection. So that came out in 2021. It's like poems from 1971 to 2021. And then, well, the big project has been this memoir, and which is called Hound Dog, a poet's memoir of rock revolution and redemption. So that's the title of it. So that's been the focus, but I've also been writing poems, new poems, and publishing them along the way. And I'd like to do, another poetry book collection after this stuff comes out. Because one year in 2016, I had 3 books come out from Wayne State.
I
I had my
spotted that. I spotted that. I thought,
know,
what? That was
weird.
Yeah.
And they learned, they said, we're never doing that again. All the books sold okay. But one was this anthology I did called Heaven Was Detroit. It wasn't all me. I mean, I collected essays by a lot of well-known writers and local writers on some known Detroit acts, but also more obscure Detroit acts that I wanted to put in print and keep forever. And then I did my poetry book that year. And then also I edited a Michigan short story collection. And all three of those won various awards. But the one award that I've won before called the Library of Michigan, what do they call that? The Library of Michigan award, book award. I won that year. I got two of the books got that award. And the one guy on the committee said, you almost had three. And which would have been the other one, the fiction one is called Bob Seger's House. Because here in Detroit, everybody thinks they know where Bob Seger lives, but nobody does. So you hear a lot of stories of, oh yeah, Bob Seger lives on this lake. Bob Seger lives over here. Now I used to see Bob Seger when I was in high school at a little club on the corner here. He didn't really become famous until that Beautiful Loser album, but he had like 4 or 5, maybe 6 albums before that were killer, which are kind of out of print now. And he had great songs before that. So anyway, Bob Seger's House, there was a story in it called Bob Seger's House. And it was a person saying, oh, I know where Bob Seger lives, you know.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Where can people get hold of your books and do you recommend them going to? And also, where can they get hold of more of you to wrap up part 1?
Well, everything is obviously available worldwide on Amazon, Amazon, UK, Amazon, Barnes and Nobles. You probably can order them through Waterstone, you know, in the UK anyway. Here you can order them anywhere. Bookstores carry them, and in Michigan and Detroit, because I've won those Michigan awards. So the books are everywhere from the lower peninsula to the far north in Michigan. And then I've done a lot of we did the Beatles show up in the UP many times, and always had great audiences for that. So my stuff is just available. You can put my name in even at Waterstones. I'm sure they may not have it in the store, but they can order it. So
Indeed. No, brilliant stuff. Great stuff. Right. We're going to wrap up part 1 here. So thank you today, ML. I've actually really enjoyed this. It's been a fascinating chat today. And if people are wondering, I had about 30 questions prepared for this chat. I think we've covered about 6. So then we've covered nearly an hour. So that kind of says
that's why you got to read the memoir.
Exactly. So that's
a lot of stories in there.
There's an awful amount. That said, it kind of says, I've not even touched on it, so we'll have to get it on part 2 down the line. Definitely, I can ask you lots more stuff. But anyway, we'll wrap up part 1 now. Take a quick break for 2 moments, and we're going to come right back. And ML's going to do some pieces for us. Looking forward to this, mate.
All right, thank you.
See you all in a few seconds, guys.